We have some very big news coming out of the Middle East. There have been multiple U.S. military installations, to include the U.S. Embassy in Iraq, Baghdad, that have all been attacked by drones and by rocket fire. Now, this is extremely concerning. We will get into the specifics of all of the bases that have been attacked. We'll also talk about the U.S. Embassy. But again, not all of these attacks happened at the exact same time on December 8th of 2023. It was more so a coordinated attack by a unison of militia groups throughout Iraq and Syria. And again, we will get to who these militia groups are because Lloyd Austin, Secretary of Defense, actually calls them out specifically. This might be the first time where the U.S. military finally specifically calls out who is doing the attacks. And not only that, Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin has already said the U.S. military and the United States does reserve the right to defend itself. And what that usually means when you put it in context is that the U.S. military is prepared to strike back if need be. Now, let me go ahead and just give you what the media is saying. So the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad was struck with 7 mortars as attacks escalate. And just so you know, I did cross-reference this with open source to verify exactly what is being said on this Reuters article. And so approximately 7 mortar rounds landed in the U.S. Embassy compound in Baghdad during an attack early on Friday, which would be December 8th. U.S. military official told Reuters in what appeared to be the largest attack of its kind in recent memory. U.S. forces in Iraq and Syria were also targeted with rockets and drones at least 5 more times on Friday, again between Iraq and Syria, 3 times at separate bases in Syria and twice at the Ain al-Assad Air Base, West Baghdad. Now, let me tell you something right now. Al-Assad Air Base has been attacked so many times since October 7th, it's almost a joke at this point, a different U.S. defense official said. The attacks were the most recorded against U.S. forces in the region in a single day since mid-October, when Iran-aligned militias started targeting U.S. assets in Iraq and Syria over Washington's backing of Israel in its war against Hamas. And just so you guys are aware, the United States has not mentioned the fact that they are getting attacked because of the war in Israel. The United States has been very careful in not even mentioning Israel in any of these attacks. All they mention is what's called the Islamic resistance in Iraq, and then they will also mention Iran. But now in this article, and you're going to see here in a second, the United States has actually finally specifically mentioned the groups who are specifically doing the attacks, because again, the United States has not actually been name-dropping these groups. U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, in a call with Iraq Prime Minister Mohammed Shia al-Sudani, condemned the attacks and singled out Iran-aligned armed groups Kata'ib Hezbollah and Harakat Hezbollah al-Nuhaba. Sorry if I said that wrong. For the recent targeting of U.S. personnel. Now again, let's go ahead and get into these groups. And I'm telling you right now, this might be the first time where the U.S. military actually specified who these groups are. Okay, so Kata'ib Hezbollah was called out by Secretary Lloyd Austin. They are an Iraqi Shia militant group, which poses a high threat to U.S. diplomatic and military personnel in Iraq and Syria because of its access to areas with a U.S. presence and its long-standing hostility towards U.S. and allied forces, as demonstrated by its history of attacks and anti-American rhetoric. They were founded in 2007, which at this point in Iraq, things were pretty rough, but things were also starting to sort of dwindle down. At this point, the United States was getting very fed up with Iraq, and then eventually Obama came into office, and then the Iraq War quote-unquote ended. Something else that's important, again, operating areas based primarily in Iraq and Syria, and also possibly operates in Bahrain, Iran, Lebanon, and Saudi Arabia, and it's estimated they have about 10,000 members. Okay, so the next group is Harakat Hezbollah al-Nujaba. They were founded in 2013. They're still active today, and of course they are backed by Iran. They are very active in Syria. The United States has had clashes with them, and they know all about them. And real quick, I just want to mention, I apologize I'm using Wikipedia. It's just easier for you guys to see the information. But a lot of this information becomes redundant. You keep reading the same thing over and over. Active in Syria and Iraq. They're enemies of Israel and the United States. And really, if you guys want to get into more details, go ahead and check them out. But yeah, these are the two groups. But it's interesting because the two groups do work together under the umbrella of Iran. That is why the United States is having a very big issue at actually repelling these guys back, because they don't want to start any bigger conflicts or issues with Iran. Now, these are the actual areas that have been attacked, which again has been verified with open source. Al-Assad Air Base, which has been attacked a lot, again, since October 7th. If I had to estimate, around maybe 20-ish times so far between drones and rocket fire. Mission support site, Euphrates, Syria. The U.S. Embassy, Baghdad. Rumlan Landing Zone, Syria. Patrol Base, Shadadi, Syria, and Erbil, Iraq. These are all of the military installations and areas and the embassy that's all been attacked, and these are the numbers that correlate with how many attacks happened on that specific location on December 8th. Now, I have to throw this out there. Essentially, the United States has a lot of firepower in the Middle East, to include 2 strike groups, to include battleships, to include fighter squadrons. You have A-10 Warthogs, yet these militia groups do not seem to care. They seem to actually almost welcome that the U.S. military has brought all of the firepower into the Middle East, and it's almost like a challenge between Syria and Iraqi fighters who can cause the most damage and who can cause the most havoc on U.S. military members. Now, what's also interesting is between about, we're at about 100 attacks, which is a lot. And I'm sure the mainstream media is not even reporting this. I'm going to be honest with you, I don't watch Fox News or any of that stuff. But again, if I had to make a guess, it's very hard for anyone to fathom how could the U.S. military have been attacked over 100 times since October 7th, and you're almost not hearing about it, and the United States is almost doing nothing about it. Now, the United States has had really one effective attack where we had a period of peace. At one point, an AC-130J was actually spotted on open source intelligence, and then it was verified by Central Command, where finally the United States decided to attack back. We were up to about maybe 80-ish attacks at this point, where the United States decided, let's use an AC-130J Ghost Rider, and let's actually strike back some legitimate fighters. Because before this point, when we were up to about 30 attacks, President Biden had enough, and he actually instituted his own attack with 2 F-16s on military infrastructure, but there were still more and more attacks after that. Again, the reason why I'm pointing this out is because there seems to be some sort of correlation and some sort of cause and effect when the U.S. military actually goes out and does a retaliation attack on actual members of these militia groups. There seems to be some sort of peace in the Middle East for a little period of time. But again, when there are these long periods of peace, we then see these mass coordinated attacks between Iraq and Syria, and it's not like the U.S. military cannot handle these attacks. These are not like massive ambushes with like hundreds and thousands of fighters attacking one military installation. It's more so just these coordinated drone attacks and rocket attacks on many specific areas or small outposts, and then they run away real quick. But other than that, it seems like the U.S. military has not been wanting to waste their time and resources on actually going out and attacking these military members. However, Secretary Lloyd Austin did make the point that, look, the United States is prepared to defend themselves, and now that we are up to about 100 attacks, and the only thing the United States did was retaliate maybe 6 or 7 times, we're talking about a massive discrepancy between defending yourself and then actually going out and attacking the enemy. And I also have to mention the underlying issue here with the Houthis, which are, they're not fighting out of Iraq and Syria, they're fighting down out of Yemen. The really big issue, again, for the U.S. military is they have all of these military assets in the Red Sea and the Mediterranean Sea who are prepared to attack whatever forces they need to attack via like an air campaign. The Houthis out of Yemen, they're quite literally doing whatever they want. They're raiding ships with their helicopters, they're launching coordinated attack on other ships, and the U.S. military is essentially bearing the weight with the U.S. Navy at trying to repel back the Houthis. Now again, I know we're supposed to be talking about Iraq and Syria, but you cannot talk about Iran-backed military groups without talking about the Houthis, because the Houthis, they've been extremely effective in exploiting the fact of, as long as the Houthis can hide behind their civilian population, as long as the Houthis can take whatever resources they want from civilians and then go out and attack U.S. military ships and U.S. military, what's the word I want to say? They want to exploit the Navy. It looks like this strategy is working, and it looks like this is the chink in the armor for the United States. These militant groups have found what to do. They've looked at the history between Afghanistan. They looked at what's happening in Syria and Iraq. As long as these militant groups can stay funded, as long as they can attack here and there and cause some damage a couple times a week maybe, the United States can virtually do nothing about it. Unless the United States wants to bear the risk of actually causing a regional conflict, which President Joe Biden has already said we are not going to be the aggressors, and that is why you're not seeing a lot of attacks or retaliation. You're virtually seeing nothing happening to the Houthis out of Yemen. I promise nothing will most likely happen to the Houthis, because if the Houthis get attacked down in Yemen, we're going to see another massive humanitarian disaster. Now look, as far as this embassy attack, a lot of it is a little bit of hype. It's not uncommon for the embassy to have the high risk of possibly getting attacked. The embassy is highly secured and protected. There are reports and rumors that the embassy did not even activate its anti-missile defense systems because they didn't seem like they were under that big of a threat. Nonetheless, again, there were no casualties reported throughout these coordinated attacks, and there was not much damage in general that was said to be caused. But again, the real damage that's probably going to happen is if the United States decides to activate its AC-130Js or its aerial assets to actually go after these militia groups. I would be surprised if ground troops like special forces or regular old military members like what I want to say, big army guys like somebody from the 10th Mountain Division or the 3rd Infantry Division. I would be surprised if those units actually go out and attack these military groups. This is not what the mission is for the U.S. military. The mission for the U.S. military is essentially to hunker down, protect Iraq, protect Syria, and make sure there are no regional conflicts. And if you want a regional conflict, you start putting boots on the ground. That's been proven time and time again throughout all of military history. And the United States, again, to include President Joe Biden, who's the top dog, has said, we will not start a regional conflict. But that doesn't mean they will not use their aerial assets to take out the enemies of the United States.